Hi there, welcome. This is the 168th edition of DF Direct Weekly, our weekly discussion show discussing the latest gaming and technology news. And I guess we're still on the kind of come down after a range of gaming events. We thought it was over, then Nintendo came along. DF Direct special for that. This Direct is going to be somewhat different. Joining me, the panel, first of all, Alex Battaglia. Hi.
Yes, Rich. Exciting times. I also have just received in the mail, thanks to Will Judd, a nice bespoke t-shirt, if anyone sees it. So I'm going to do the weekly join us also on Patreon. And if you can, take a look at our merchandise store because we have some nice new merchandise. This is the new wares.
Absolutely. Store.digitalfoundry.net. I am too wearing the new bespoke shirt in white, which was demanded by our supporters. So here it is. You can go and buy it, hopefully. John, hi. Sorry.
Oh, I have nothing to sell
No.
to you. I'm just here. I was just thinking about how Alex Battaglia kind of goes with Activision Blizzard, the whole AB thing.
It does.
Kind of works. So if you were an Activision Blizzard studio, Alex, which one would you be?
King. That was bad. Sorry.
All right, let's get this show on the road then.
Okay. First news topic of the week. This one's quite interesting because Starfield now has mods available and they work on Xbox consoles as well. And first order of business for many of these modders was basically to take a look at the Xbox Series S version of the game and to see whether a performance mode could be added in a similar vein to Series X. Because obviously, Bethesda only concentrated on the Xbox Series X for those additional display options. And, there are mods available, a whole range of them, in fact. I've got some capture here showing the various Series S mods that are available. There's a very sort of basic one. We're going to start with that one because I have tested a couple of them. We're going to start with this fairly basic one. All it does is basically turn off VSync, which in effect unlocks the frame rate. So yes, you do get full performance of the Series S CPU and GPU. The issue being you also get eye-rending screen tearing, which I was fairly sure would be cleaned up if you've got VRR. But even so, let's check it out. And it works. You do actually get frame rates above 30 frames per second. Some footage here of Aquila, which is quite interesting because this area of the game is heavily CPU bound. And I also think it's pretty much GPU bound as well because we're kind of very, very close to the sort of 30 FPS limit anyway. We can go above, can go into the 40s. But this is an interesting example of one of those areas in Starfield where you're always going to have a hard limitation, regardless of which console you're on. Mostly that's because of the CPU. However, yes, internal areas can run at very, very high frame rates, not quite locked at 60, but there you go. It's there's definitely scope here, I think, for a performance mode. But they didn't stop there. Now, there's a whole range of Series S mods available. That some of them just completely annihilate the image quality just to get as many frames out as possible on that Series S, although all of these mods work on the Series X as well if you want to try them out. This one, though, I found quite interesting. We're keeping the unlock and we are adjusting the resolution internally to 720p. And I would say this is quite transformative in terms of performance. You're getting some quite good performance here, I'd say. It can go all the way up to like 120 frames per second in some scenarios, but
Oh my goodness.
It's not bad. Yeah, I mean, in the 90s here, in over 100 actually, in that internal area, the Crete Research Lab right at the beginning of the game, just sort of scanning through some capture here. And what can I say? I'd say a Starfield Series S performance mode is possible if Bethesda wanted to do it. But in the meantime, you've got these mods which, somewhat clumsy implementation of the same effect, but they do work and they show that the headroom is there. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of those PS4 Pro style performance modes, though, because like all the city footage is like closer to 30. It's like mid 40s at best.
It's impressive.
With dips
actually.
below 40, right?
Yeah.
So it dips really hard, but then you can go all the way up to 120 and like really tight stuff. So it's like really unstable.
Yeah.
But I think if you had VRR, it would at least be tenable.
Yeah.
What I would like to see off this, based upon that variability of performance that you just said, even without VRR, I would love to see a 40 FPS mode coming in here for Series S, because 60 is off the table, even like you said, with the original resolutions and unlocking the frame rate. And that variability between a city, between 40 and 50 is okay-ish on a VR display as long as LFC's on. Right. But I still think like 40 FPS, it's probably very doable, minus those hitches that the game still has. And I think that is what this footage showed us. But bravo, I think it's great that we have mods at all on a console game. Yeah. So like the fact that we can even do this is incredible. So Bethesda deserves a lot of praise for that.
Mm-hmm. Almost as good as Ark.
Yes, almost as good as Ark. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is great to see those mods, and obviously they are available also on Skyrim and Fallout as well, Fallout 4. So yeah, it's nice to see that. There is one John-style caveat, which is that if you use mods at all, you can no longer unlock achievements, and but you can use your existing saves, but then they get copied into a separate mods only save area that you have, which alas doesn't allow you to access achievements. But even so, the fact that it's there at all, I think, is quite remarkable, and good stuff. I think
it's neat. It's neat to see, but I kind of feel like it's just a cool thing, because like realistically, if you're disabling achievements and all that, like who's on a Series S that's that concerned about performance, right? Well, that wouldn't have a different platform to play on.
Yeah, you never know. I kind
of feel like it's an academic exercise.
Yeah, I guess I see what you're saying. I think the point is, though, that there is similar scalability to the Series X version, just at lower resolutions, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it, when you think about it?
I mean, it's the kind of stuff we see on like the Steam Deck, for instance. Yeah. To hit those higher frame rates, you just drop that res.
It'd be interesting to see actually a 720p run on, or even lower, on Series X versus S, to see the difference in CPU performance that they have. Cool. That would be a fun little bench to do, actually.
You could do that. There's no reason why you can't run the 720p mod on Xbox Series X. That would be quite amazing.
So the mod itself is determining the res. I'm wondering if you could like run it at like 360p or something.
Who knows? I mean, I didn't do the mods, but I'm assuming that the lower resolutions would be available. I'm not quite sure what the FSR2 upscale is going back up to, mind you. Right. It's 1440p. What I can say, though, is that when you look at the 720p footage, it's kind of very rough looking, which is kind of surprising, bearing in mind that the 900p native going up to 1440p via FSR2 actually looks pretty good. So I don't know whether there's something odd going on with FSR2, or maybe it's just not working at all. But it's 720p does look kind of dog rough. What can I say?
Dog rough.
Mm-hmm.
Dog rough.
But yeah, this was something I just wanted to test out, just to see the viability of a performance mode. And I think that the sort of metrics are broadly in line with what you'd expect from Series X running at a higher resolution, exactly as expected. So, it's there, you can test it. Maybe it will make Bethesda think twice about putting in some kind of official support for a performance mode, because I think it would be kind of worthwhile, just as it was on X. But there we are, just an interesting experiment, really. I don't really have too much more to add to that, really, but I do like the idea of the 720p face-off in Aquila.
Yes, do it. And with them dragging a PC on the side too.
Aquila.
You could also drag in the Frankenstein PC on the side. You'd have that then, and like, I don't know, maybe the best CPU you got too. You'd get like these 4 and see the ultimate range. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Do it now.
Yeah. Frankenstein PC, I love
it. Yeah, particularly the pronunciation.
I mean, you guys have seen Young Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
That is good.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move on. Okay, so for our next news story, well, this one's quite interesting because we're actually reshooting it, because we originally shot a segment concerning these new PlayStation 2 emulators for PlayStation 5 and PSP as well. But after recording that segment, we actually took a deeper look, and we feel we need to kind of redo this one. It's a redo, John, and you're joining me to talk about it.
Yes, that's right. It's Future John again. We're back. Yeah, for the last direct, I basically opened them up 20 minutes before the show, and I was like, all right, this is it. But turns out there's a little bit more to them than I first thought, and they are a little bit weird, shall we say. So to basically fill you in on what's going on here, this is the first round of PlayStation 2 games that are available for PlayStation 5 specifically. Previously, the only way to play PlayStation 2 games through the PlayStation Plus program was to play PlayStation 4 emulator versions of PS2 games. So that's what I covered in my original video, like Jak and Daxter. All the Jak games were there and a bunch of others. They were also known, I believe, to have some problems where there was some games that were glitchy when played on a PS5. So there was clearly an issue with that emulator, right? With these new games, there's stuff like Lego Star Wars, Ghost Hunter, Tomb Raider, Legend, and Sly Cooper now available. The main thing you notice when you open it up is that it now has a PS5 specific menu. So if you tap the PlayStation 5's start button, or whatever you want to call that thing, the start-ish button, it now brings up a menu. Using the PS5 design language, you can choose things like enhancements, video modes, and various other things on there. The enhancements just disable or enable things like rewind and save states and whatnot. The video modes are still bad. It's like the normal one, and then there's this like modern setting that just crushes the blacks for some reason, and it looks stupid. Okay. I don't understand why it's there. And then there's two arcade modes, like a arcade classic and an arcade modern. That's just like two variants of a somewhat poor CRT filter that don't really look like a proper CRT filter. So
okay,
they're not good. I wouldn't recommend any of them. Just use the default. One thing I did notice right away that's interesting is that some of these games, like with Sly Cooper and Tomb Raider, you can actually choose your region from the menu, which I feel like is a step up from what Sony used to do, where like in certain regions they would force, say, the PAL version, which sucked. Here, you can actually choose, do you want PAL or NTSC? And if you choose the PAL version, you get the PAL version of the game with the different name, which is Sly Raccoon versus Sly Cooper. And it does indeed run slower. It's still 50 hertz in a 60 hertz container, so you get judder. But thankfully, NTSC version is the default. It's there. It works great. Once you get into the game, though, so this is the thing that confused me the first time was, is there a resolution boost or not? Right. And
people think that there isn't, right? Because Tomb Raider Legend came out and everybody said it was looking blurry, doesn't look as though there's any resolution increase. People were saying it was running at original resolution, and we needed to get some metrics on that, right?
Correct. And this is a little bit tricky. So my first impression was, I guess these are just original res. But the problem is I'm still not used to seeing lower res content like this on a 77-inch screen, a screen you also have. Yes. And the pixels look gigantic. So, but then I looked closer. I actually pulled into the capture card and started to count stuff. And I'm like, all right, these are still low res, but it's not the same. So on one axis, we got around 576p, which actually sounds like, that is like PS2 PAL resolution. And Tomb Raider is a progressive scan game, I believe. But then on the other one, we got like over 800 something p, which is higher than what you could realistically get on a PS2, especially because
640 and 720 for NTSC and PAL respectively.
Yeah. So, PS2 normally, and I suspect this game is probably 640 by 448 or 512 by 448 internally, with the full progressive lines. And so it's a widescreen game, so it was played in 16 by 9, but obviously back then it would be anamorphic. And it's like this on Xbox, GameCube, PS2, where you still have the 4:3 image, but you stretch it out so the pixels become wider to get the widescreen. And you don't really see that here. So this actually it is higher res, but it's not high res. It's like a very subtle boost via the emulation that does make it clearer. But it's still, the way they do the filtering up to 4K or whatever your output resolution is pretty bad. So it's very blurry. This is especially a problem with the user interface elements, like title screen, menus, everything. So those are obviously just the original PS2 assets, stretched, by the way, because the anamorphic mode doesn't account for that in this game, so you just get stretched looking assets, and then they apply like a thick bilinear blur to it, so it ends up looking really, really ugly. Like, it's really bad, the UI. And here's what's interesting though, when they show like some of the copyright text and stuff at the beginning of some of these games, you see that same weird filtering artifact that you also saw on the previous emulator on PS4. Right? Because the way it dealt with these 2D elements, it's very similar between them.
This is just all really baffling, John, and I'll tell you why. It's like when the Classics emulator came along, it was pretty obvious what was wrong with it and what needed to be improved. They've taken a second run at it, and it's still not particularly good. In fact, it sounds like the resolution has actually got lower than the Classics emulator, which was basically a 2x2 boost on each axis.
It might still be that, and it might depend a little on the game. The thing about Tomb Raider is that it actually doesn't specify res enhancement, so even though it does seem to be higher res, it's not in the description, whereas stuff like Lego, Ghost Hunter, and the like, that does specify an enhancement, and those do seem to be in the 2x on each axis range. On rough counts. Sly Cooper is also interesting, because on one axis it's like 2x, but then the other one just comes out around like 480p. But Sly Cooper is a field rendered game, so it uses interlaced rendering. So if you took a single frame, you would only get like 224 lines on a single frozen frame. So what I think they've done is by increasing it 2x, as it jitters between the two interlaced frames, you're actually getting double the amount of data per line. So it's like a weird version of interlaced rendering.
Okay, but it just does still kind of sound as like they haven't really done a particularly effective job with the emulation.
No, I agree. Here. And here's the thing, though. If you pipe an original PS2 into, like, say, a Tink 4K, Richard Tink 4K, or the Morph or something, right? Especially if one of the digital mods for it, you can get better image quality than this at native original PS2 res. So even though the rendering res is technically higher, the way that they treat it makes it look perceptibly worse than it should, because of the strong bilinear blur and there's just like no care put into the way that they scale that image to full screen. And it just makes it look dreadful. Versus again, you plug a real PS2 into like a great scaler, you're going to get amazing results. And those are results you can achieve in software with an emulator on a machine like PS5. So they've simply made, I would say, bad choices in regards to image treatment that ultimately hamper their efforts here. And that's a shame. The only thing I will add, though, is that it does seem to improve performance a bit, which is often the case with emulator, because I replayed a section in Sly Cooper on my real PS2, and there's a couple spots where you see the frame rate just dip for a second, right? Doesn't do that on the PS5 emulator, so that's cool. But on the flip side, so there's this entire intro section in Sly where you're in Paris, you're going to steal from the police chief right at the beginning of the game, right? It's the first thing you do. When I played it on PS5, I was like, there's something weird here, right? There's just the dialogue sequences, and then there's just this background, very quiet ambient audio, like police sirens and such. And I thought it felt awkward, so I instantly popped it into my PS2, and there's supposed to be music during this entire scene. And Oliver, you can put it up right here. I actually captured this. And just take a listen here to this PS2 emulation version. There's no sound there's no music in the background, right? Which that's a glitch. And if you restart it, it seems to be okay, but it's just an odd little emulation glitch that popped up, and the levels after that actually did have music. So something else is wrong there. That's not great.
Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't seem like a particularly well-realized emulator again.
Yeah. It's acceptable enough. It plays the games. There's major room for improvement. And like, people like us, we know the secret to make this look better. We're not the only ones either. There are ways to massively improve this. They're just not doing it. And I'm genuinely confused by some of those decisions.
Yeah, it is bizarre. And I've said this in the past, why, Sony are unable to do this while the retro hardware community is producing banger after banger in terms of like upscalers and whatnot. And if you're actually saying that the original games running at the original, at the original resolutions going through, processors like the RetroTink are producing better results than these emulators, which are apparently running at higher resolutions. That's just bizarre. And also when you're talking about the modes being not particularly effective, this is kind of like a bit bizarre because, again, this has been, I wouldn't say solved, but it's certainly been, addressed by the retro hardware community to a much higher standard. It's just completely baffling. I mean, I just can't quite accept that Sony's just sort of ignoring the fact that all of these advances have been made and actually taking it on board, as opposed to doing what they're doing here, which just doesn't seem particularly effective.
I agree completely. And it's not just PS2 either. We went back to look at some of the PSP stuff as well. Specifically, they just released Daxter on the PSP. And this seems to be largely similar to what we saw before in that it just runs in a much higher resolution than the original PSP game. Some elements are filtered, some are not, which I guess is consistent with the original. But I don't really like the image treatment there either, but it's probably better than what they did on PS2. The problem is that for games with 30 FPS cap, there seems to be a frame persistence issue where you get sort of frame pacing problems, but not consistently. So like in Daxter, it was just fine initially, and you can see it in my frame rate graph here. But then I went in, skipped the cutscene, and then I'm in this little room here. And as you see now, the frame time graph just goes to heck. It's completely messed up, and it's very jittery. And Oliver spent more time with these like Resistance and the like, and apparently those are even worse. And the games just they don't present correctly as they did on a real PSP. So again, it's sort of like insulting the legacy of it. And especially in the PSP case, again, you look at, I keep bringing it up, but this RetroTink, these scalar hardware, they have these amazing ways to simulate like subpixels on a PSP of the PSP screen, the pixel grid of an LCD, and beautifully blow it up on a large 4K display to make the games look good. They could even do that with like downsampling, where you like output to like a virtualized pixel grid, but you're rendering internally higher res, then back down to that res. There's so many things you can do to make these games look both authentic but also more attractive. And this just feels like the laziest. Not to say lazy devs, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like the selections they made on the actual settings feel lazy, where they didn't think about how to make these games look best. They're just like, it's like starting an emulator for the first time and just like clicking a couple buttons and being done with it. I don't like the choices they made. And
it's baffling.
And the fact that it's just this PS1, PS2, and PSP only, it also makes for some weirdness. Cause like I was scrolling through the store and I said, oh, there's Tekken 6 on PS4 and PS5. That's sweet. But then it occurred to me, wait, it's the PSP version of Tekken 6, which by the way is very impressive for PSP. But if you're thinking like I'm going to download Tekken 6, you're thinking like the proper console version of Tekken 6, right? So it's funny to see games like that put up here on the store, because it's not really, and I guess it's the same with Tomb Raider Legend in a way, because there was obviously PC, 360, and even a PS3 version later in that HD collection of Tomb Raider, right? That are all much more advanced. The 360 version was known for, they added all that cool like pixel shader stuff and lots of more advanced rendering techniques. But it's also symbolic of that era where I believe the original Xbox version of Tomb Raider Legend is a 60 FPS game, if I recall. And then the 360 version is like 20 to 30. In 720p, so it's like extremely choppy. It's worse than any other version. If you drop the 360 version to 480p, it actually smooths it out, and it's just 30. But there's nice enhanced visuals, but it runs a lot worse than the last gen version, which was very.
So it sounds like just generally Sony has still got work to do here. But if this is their do-over, it's not particularly compelling, is it?
No, and I don't like if they really cared about these. And maybe, I don't know how important this is to the bottom line, but I feel like they're missing something here. Like, I feel like if you brought in the right people, even people like us, to come in and be like, all right, this is how we need to tackle this, revisiting these classics. There is a way to bring your legacy forward onto these machines and present it in a way that is extremely respectful and really helps users appreciate and understand these games from the past. Instead, they're just kind of buried here in this essentials menu, whatever. It's a bunch of random emulators jumbled together. None of them are configured well. The whole thing just feels really sloppy in a way that sucks. So I'm not impressed with this.
Okay, well that's disappointing, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so.
And with that, let's move on. Okay, so this week it was hugely exciting for me because, I mean, for months now here on DF Direct Weekly, we've been kind of speculating about the future of Windows on ARM. This week, the Microsoft Copilot laptops launched, various models. We weren't sampled with one, but I put in a pre-order for the Surface laptop, and you can kind of see it in the background there. Very, very beautiful machine, very, very light. I'm not going to say silent. It's got a tiny little fan in there, but even running at full pelt, it's very, very quiet. Lovely OLED screen. Looks like a really high quality device, as you would expect from a Surface, right? But we need to talk about the gaming, because that's kind of been something that's been touched upon in the run-up to launch, but nothing really definitive. We do know that it has Auto SR, which we've discussed in the past, which is like a kind of system-level AI-based upscaler. But beyond that, there's been sort of not much. Talk of Baldur's Gate running at 1080p 30, not much more. So yes, I didn't actually start work on the Surface laptop until, well, basically yesterday, because I'm currently working on the Asus ROG Ally, which you can see in the background there. So
I can't believe, I still can't get over that, Rich, that we officially learned it was ROG.
Yeah,
it feels like I've been betrayed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what can I say? But basically I set up the Surface yesterday because I wanted to quickly offer some first impressions for this Direct, right? Install, setup, basically just like a normal PC, despite the fact it's running on an ARM processor, as you'd expect. And to begin with, everything seemed fine. I installed Steam, I installed some games, and then I loaded a game. And that game was Crysis 3 Remastered. You press play on Steam, and then, you get the little stop icon that appears on Steam when you start a game. But then it just switched back to play, and basically nothing happened. So yeah, Crysis 3 Remastered doesn't work. Just
your fancy new laptop, Rich, cannot play Crysis 3, your favorite game.
How many pounds is this laptop?
2,000. I paid £2,000. The reason I put the £2,000 down is because Microsoft offers a 60-day return window, and let's just say that I will be making use of it. Before we move on. Next order of business. Well, whenever you look at one of my handheld reviews, I always cover Forza Horizon 5. It's a great game. Looks awesome on. It runs great on all mobile processors. Again, press the button on Steam, the play button, and then nothing happens. Just goes. You get the stop button, and it goes back to play. It's another game that just doesn't work. And starting to get a bit worried at this point. Does it play games at all? Control is one that was also mooted for compatibility. So, I gave that a go, and it does work. I've got some footage of it here. This is running at 768p connected to a capture card, but it should be offering 1080p as an option. But weirdly, for some reason, it doesn't. Let's put that aside for now. 768p low settings. Alex, you pointed out this morning it's kind of similar to Xbox One.
It is.
It does run similar. Mostly at 60 frames per second to begin with, few sort of blips and oddness. It does look as though Auto SR is active on there, but I haven't done any on-off comparisons. One thing I will note is that Auto SR does seem to have a destructive impact on HUD elements. I think they basically warned us about that in their blog. But yeah, basically runs pretty well to begin with. But when you get into the trouble spots in Control, the Corridor of Doom and the fight directly after that, you get some pretty bad stuttering, and it doesn't feel great. Other games I tried, I mean, at this point, I was just really quite disappointed that, I bought a PC that doesn't run PC games. And, we can laugh about it, but the point is, the whole point of a PC is compatibility, right? And, I recognize it's running on an ARM processor, but, when Apple did it, I think they did a much better job of straddling the divide between x86 and ARM. And, things generally worked. Here, it seems to be entirely random as to whether a game will work or not. I went to look for a list of compatible games so I wouldn't be wasting my time any further. Next game I tested was God of War. This one's quite interesting. I was running this time. It did actually recognize that I was connected at 1080p. However, the performance wasn't great in the mid-20s, so I actually changed the resolution scale to 75%. I think it's 810p. And basically, performance is sort of 30-ish or under, which isn't great, but there's some awful stutter going on here. It's not great. I'm just looking back at the footage now, and it looks pretty awful. What can I say? A massive frame time spike there I'm looking at. My God. It's just really not good. I would not consider it playable. Next game I looked at was Dark Souls 3, which, shouldn't be too difficult. It's not exactly a highly challenging game. You can see from the footage here, frame rate analysis, that it's basically, this is, I think, 768p. It's not great. It's basically sort of mid-30s, occasional 20s, very, very rarely, going up into the 50s. But again, egregious stutter here. It's just not great at all. So it's not looking good for the Surface laptop, is it? It's really unimpressive. However, final test here, because Alex demanded this one. It. And I agreed that it would be a great test to do. Obviously, there was discussion prior to the launch that Baldur's Gate 3 was running at 1080p 30 or thereabouts. And, you know what we're going to be doing? We're going to be going straight to Act 3, the Baldur's Gate city, and having a look to see what's going on there. Now, this one's really important because obviously it's CPU heavy on x86. So what's going to happen on ARM when presumably weaker CPU cores are also having to go through that Prism layer, that sort of translation layer? And the answer is, first of all, I tried at 720p, low settings, basically bare bones stuff to make sure we're CPU limited, but that would of course pare back the CPU utilization as well. But even so, not bad. It's sort of running in 30 FPS upwards, really, which I was kind of surprised by. A few dips beneath. It does still seem to be some stutter. It's not hardly a fantastic outlook overall. But the point is that it's doing much better than we expected, right, Alex?
Yeah. In this case here, and this with all your other tests, it's really hard. Qualcomm, we're not just looking at a CPU here. We're also looking at a GPU architecture that has a lot of unknowns, and probably the drivers, if we've seen anything from the Intel situation, let's be honest, the drivers are probably awful. And this is their first outing, and Intel had incredible trouble, and Qualcomm definitely will too. The GPU supports a lot of stuff, though, interestingly. But in this case, when you look at this test, which seems much better, but then you go to something like DX11, you showed Dark Souls and you also showed God of War. Most likely it's hard in such a case without any internal tools to know what is happening, to know if this is an issue with the CPU translation layer from Prism, or if it's actually their GPU driver being unable to deal with certain things that happened under DX11 that are very simple for maybe NVIDIA to solve or AMD, but for a new driver manufacturer where the games weren't even made for their GPU architecture, who even knows? So I'm also like John, I'm actually kind of really disappointed in the day zero experience based upon what you just showed here, because I would have expected Microsoft, the people who make DirectX and the people who essentially champion x86 as part of the PC platform, to do better with a day zero, especially for something so expensive. and you buy a PC and you expect it to work. And this is obviously not that experience at all. So yeah, but I think in the future, what I would like to see is a little bit more openness regarding like how much you can profile this thing, because it would be good to know if a game's running poorly because the GPU's the problem and the driver, or if it's because of Prism, and we just don't have that info yet, right?
Yeah, you're quite right. If you run Reaver Tuner, it just crashes the game on start, any game.
Sick.
Going back to Baldur's Gate, though, a bit of a happy ending here, so to speak. Basically, after doing 720p low, I mean, the game looks hideous. There's no doubt about it. I didn't want to play it like that, so I kept it 720p resolution. But weirdly enough, you do the auto detect settings and it suggests ultra, which I'm not sure is correct, but I did try it. And suddenly, obviously, the game looks a whole lot better. Still at 720p, obviously. But the weird thing is that now, bearing in mind Baldur's Gate, the city is super, super CPU heavy. The frame rate here is surprisingly okay, bearing in mind what's actually happening with an ARM CPU core here going through a translation layer. We're seeing sort of performance between 20, slightly under 20 to 30 FPS, mostly in the sort of low to mid 20s, I would say, looking at the footage here. But even so, bearing in mind the amount of CPU workload that's happening there, and bearing in mind that the consoles, specifically Xbox, is not actually that much better running natively on x86, this is quite impressive, I'd say.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd say this is the best test so far.
Yeah.
But it's also like still not an ideal way to play the game.
No, obviously not.
For a $2,000 laptop.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
It's just an academic observation, really.
Yeah.
And just to sort of, to sort of, how could I say it, temper expectations. This is under a DX11. If you select Vulkan, the game just crashes. There's just so many issues here, Alex, and you're quite right. You'd expect better from Microsoft. And
dude, it's blowing me away, like how bad this turned out so far, right? First of all, obviously, we've seen this kind of transition before to like either a different architecture or a completely different OS layer. Apple did it before many years ago when they shifted to Apple Silicon, and then Valve, although still x86, they had to contend with the Linux layer, right? And both of those products on day one handled that reasonably well. They were clear as to what you could run. You didn't have the same types of issues that we're seeing here. And given that it's much later now, I feel like, and it's, it's Windows, you kind of expect better, because after that, it's like, what else is the purpose of this laptop then?
Yeah.
And then there's also like, beyond this being half baked at launch, there's the whole recall disaster.
Yes. Jesus.
Right? Like the whole product line just feels like I like what they're doing. I like what they're heading towards, but it's half baked. And I think this is the stumble that Microsoft's had in the hardware business in general, between all the Surface stuff, the phone stuff. Every time they get into this, there's really cool ideas here. There's things that you're like, this could work really well, but then it launches and it feels incomplete. And I feel like you can't take away those first impressions. People remember that stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately hurts the product. And this just feels like it wasn't ready yet.
Yeah. I mean, what can I say? I think the whole point of I said this earlier, the whole point of a PC is you buy a new PC and you know your stuff's going to work on it. Now, obviously,
it's a PC.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we know that this is a different kind of PC, but this is like the founding principle of what a PC is: compatibility. Obviously, I'm testing this out of what you might consider the prime purpose of the device. But even so, if it's not running all of this stuff, what about other non-gaming applications? I'm going to be really interested to see how the reviews all pan out. Interesting to note, of course, that based on what I'm seeing online, specifically Tom Warren at The Verge, review samples for the Surface laptop didn't go out until launch day, which, what can I say? That's always a bit of a red flag, isn't it? Review samples don't go out. I mean, obviously they're ready because, we received them on day one. I mean, the laptop arrived very early on the 18th, which was the launch date. The hardware was ready. I just don't think they wanted it to be reviewed before launch. I think there was maybe some small reviews on an Asus laptop. I don't know, but there was very, very little coverage. And yeah, you're quite right, Alex. The recall situation, situation was just. That's just basically, what can I say about that? It's an interesting feature, but the way it was implemented was just so bad that to the point where they've had to basically withdraw it and re-architect it to make it more. That's secure.
The thing, right? If it was just that, I could see still launching, but it sounds like the first experience you're having here is also not very good, which makes me think the whole product line should have been delayed, and they basically come out and have to represent it to the public, so to speak. This was the moment where they should not have launched when they did. I'm sure there was a lot riding on it, and shifting a product launch is really, really, really difficult, no doubt. But this is not a good way to kick this off. And it makes me think, again, ARM for Windows may be doomed. We'll see.
Well, it's not a great start, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to dig more into it. I do want to check out the Auto SR, but yeah, I can't say I'm massively impressed with what I've seen of it so far, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Rich, I have a very important question for you. It's a historical question. What offered a better day one experience? This Snapdragon X Elite processor in games at launch, or the S3 Verge in 1996?
I didn't have an S3 Verge, so I can't answer that.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, John?
No.
I did not. I just knew about it because it was all the 3D decelerator. I would say that the S3 Verge at least was regarded as a pretty decent 2D accelerator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe this is the same. You can play all those sweet Flash games on your 2,000-pound laptop.
I think that's funny you say that, but yeah, 3D cards were up and coming, brand new hot technology, and nobody knew what to do with it, right? 3D FX came along and blew everybody up, but the ARM space, this kind of stuff is already it's
existed for as long as x86, right?
It's around. It's been around for a long time, but it's become increasingly popular in the recent years, and we're seeing a lot of stuff move towards this. And I feel like Microsoft coming in this late, and then, I mean, they've done it before, but coming in, this is their second shot at it. I think there was
third,
the Windows.
Right?
Was this their third shot at it?
Let me think.
Oh my God.
There's Windows on ARM, and then there's also Google Town, but it's definitely number 1 or 2 or 3.
It's definitely an earlier. What CPU was used in those pocket PCs back in the day that ran Windows CE? I wonder.
Oh, I can't recall. Man, that's going.
They could have used an ARM processor in there.
It may be one of the. Is it one of the OG Celerons that was low clocked? I can't remember.
I can't remember, but that just made me think. Wait, is Windows CE?
I think in summary, I'm really interested to see what the actual
Windows
issue
CE
is.
does run on ARM.
It does?
Really?
Well, look at that. See, this is number 3 then.
Okay.
Good job.
Yeah.
I'm
just really curious as to where, what's causing the problem here. Is it the GPU driver? It just can't cope with so many games. Is it the translation layer that's causing problems? I don't know. I do think that we will see at some point an NVIDIA ARM-based SoC, if the rumors are to be believed. There's some sort of MediaTek collaboration going on there. You would expect NVIDIA to get the drivers right.
Oh yeah.
Same with AMD. I'm sure they're going to be looking at this as well, and we'll go from there. But certainly, based on what I've seen so far, I mean, just the fact that I've bought a PC and I can't load up games basically means that it's a bit of a non-starter from a gaming perspective. I'll try out these AI features, which there seems to be the whole point of the exercise seemingly. But what can I say? The new AMD APUs have AI accelerators in there which are compatible. So and Alex, you were telling me about Notebook Check review for the Surface laptop, saying that the battery life wasn't actually that great compared to Windows laptops.
It wasn't within the realm where it made the deficiencies like you talked regarding software or even the noise. The one they had was a cheaper one using the slowest end of the processor, and they were saying the noise where they thought it would be the thermal situation would be better. Mm-hmm. Essentially, but that could have just been their laptop for that review. It was a lower end one, but yeah, there's a lot of reviews coming out for these things, and there's going to be a bunch over the time. And I think we should, like you're saying, we should do a more dedicated look at certain aspects of what's going on here as much as possible, because it is a future at this moment. I hope Microsoft doesn't doom it because I want to see it keep going. But not a good start.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this week, Still Wakes the Deep launched on Game Pass and indeed Steam and other stores. And we actually had an issue highlighted that the Game Pass version of the game did not ship with upscaler support. No DLSS, no FSR, no XeSS, and yet the Steam version does have those options. And we've actually seen similar things before where Game Pass versions are missing features that are found elsewhere. And looking into this, it's all looking a bit odd and curious, but there does seem to be an explanation, right, Alex?
Yeah, the explanation was posted by the developer Chinese Room elsewhere. The controversy is essentially you're buying a game on Game Pass, or getting it in Game Pass as part of Game Pass, and it's lacking the rest of the features that the PC platform otherwise supports on other storefronts. And the explanation is, to quote, to add more information, we have some technical limitations due to the difference between how the Game Pass and Steam/Epic Store versions are built. Unfortunately, this means that other upscaling options aren't available in the Game Pass version. The PS5, Xbox Series X, S, and WinGDK, the Game Pass PC version, all have the same options, while we added extra upscaling options to the Steam and Epic Store versions. Adding them to WinGDK, aka what is on Game Pass PC, would require a custom-coded solution. Okay, since then, they've announced that they're going to be adding this as well to a patch that should be coming, I believe, in July. They're going to be adding the upscalers to that GDK Game Pass version over time. But I think it highlights, an issue with Game Pass is that day one or day zero experiences of Game Pass versions of games are often worse than what you get elsewhere. Rich mentioned that we saw it in the past before. I think we saw it with Metro Exodus. We saw it with No Man's Sky on Game Pass, missing things like DLSS. There's been a couple other titles too that are missing
the
things.
Ascent,
or
Remnant 2, Remnant 2, Power World even.
Yeah, that's another one. John used Game Pass for that, and there was no DLSS there. I remember that.
Yep.
And there's also been times where like the Game Pass version is not getting necessarily the rest of the game code that should be the day one launch version. That's happened also in the past too, so it has extra bugs that the other versions don't have. And I think this points out a very large problem that we're complaining about Microsoft this episode. That they have with Game Pass on PC, and that it shouldn't be some sort of extra stepping stone for a developer to kind of jump over here to get their game launched. They shouldn't have to be compiling anything so radically different to get a game running on Game Pass and have it available on their storefront. It should literally just be the exact same, more or less, than what you get on Steam without such a big issue. And I know this is obviously hard because Steam integration requires things for like achievements, and there is some level of specific store integration that occurs to enable certain things like achievements, DLC, whatever, but it shouldn't be so radically different than what you see on Steam to require a different version, because let's be honest with you, they are the smallest market here versus everyone else on PC. Steam's huge. Epic is large enough, I guess, now to be competitive in some aspect. And then they're the underdog here. And if they want developers to have good versions, they shouldn't be making it extra hard for them to get that out there. And the fact that this keeps happening over and over again shows that they need to change things up. That and other things as well, too. I didn't talk about it, but I recently covered Hellblade 2, Senua's Saga. Now, this is a Game Pass game, and they've advertised it, dashboard level stuff on Xbox Series X. Well, I could only play the game on PC via Steam. I have recordings of me trying to load the game using the Xbox store, the Xbox app and the Microsoft Store after downloading it. And I click the button to play the game after it's installed, after multiple restarts, and nothing happens. This is like unthinkable on Steam. Like, seriously, I don't think I've ever seen that on Steam for like a normal game where I just click it and it just doesn't work if it's a new release.
What you mean, unless you're running on a Surface laptop?
Unless I'm running on a Surface laptop. And there's a lot of reasons why that could be happening, but it all comes back to the fact that it's like some sort of service installed into Windows that requires a whole bunch of like connective tissue to work correctly. Like if you don't have things like, I don't know, BitLocker protection on, it won't launch. Or if you don't have Windows Defender set up a certain way, it won't launch a game. There's all this BS that's in the way that Steam doesn't deal with because it's just a normal EXE. And since it's an app installation, it has all these problems because Windows apps are terrible. So yeah, there's just a lot of issues there with Game Pass on PC still, even after the launch of the new Xbox app, that they just need to get around if they ever want to be taken seriously. And see, like one last rant here is that their UI interfaces are horrible. Where if you click a button, you should know immediately whether or not the button is being registered as a click. Almost none of their new Windows UI doesn't do that. You have like a kind of like a gray zone there of did the button click register? And this is really important to make sure that people know, because you can sometimes click download and then like it doesn't start downloading for like 15 seconds, but you don't know. And so you keep clicking it and like, this shouldn't be, this is bad. So Windows.
To go back to your Hellblade point, Alex, I obviously ran that on the Frankenstein's console PC and it did work, both the Steam and the store version. So this is a classic point of works fine on my PC. However, remember all of my rage and fury trying to get Tomb Raider Definitive Edition to work on my PC.
Right.
Windows Store again. And basically Crystal Dynamics stealth dropped Tomb Raider Definitive Edition, which was previously console version only, Xbox, PlayStation. If you wanted to play on PC, you had the non-definitive version with old Lara, different Lara.
Yeah.
And so, the game came out and I thought, well, I'll give this a go. Definitive Edition on PC, great. Except exactly the same thing that happened with you on Hellblade, Alex. You download it, you start the game. In this case, I actually got the old launcher, the Windows launcher that enables you to set the settings before you launch the game. Launch the game, nothing happens. It just quits. There's serious problems with Microsoft Game Pass and the launcher and all manner of stuff. Dude, here. It's just not.
There's nothing worse than having a button animates and you click on it and you're not sure, like, is it doing something in the background? Is it just not working? Like, what's going on? You keep clicking and nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no information to you to troubleshoot. It's extremely annoying.
Absolutely. It just quits. There's nothing you can do about it. And I raised the issue with Crystal and they pointed me to a Game Pass page that says, here's what to do, which is, just nonsense. Nothing happens. It still doesn't work. Still haven't played Tomb Raider Definitive Edition on PC, which is a bit of a bummer. But, this all highlights that there's sort of real issues with Game Pass and the Windows Store specifically that just doesn't seem to happen on other stores. Need to get their act together, I think. Anything to add?
I would also add that if you Google these issues, that you come to a level of workarounds which are just beyond headache inducing. You have to like reinitialize the apps. I don't know, a whole bunch of stuff that you have to do in like command prompt. And it's like,
it's PowerShell time, baby.
Yeah, it's time to load up the PowerShell, and it feels really like a Linux problem if you've ever worked with Linux, and this is Windows, and it should not be like this.
Which in turn feels like a DOS problem.
Which feels like a DOS problem. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Microsoft are custodians basically of the Windows ecosystem, and there's games that we can't launch within their launcher. This is just unacceptable. It's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But there it is. And, to your point, Alex, you're entirely right that developers shouldn't be jumping through hoops in order to accommodate Windows Store / Game Pass / WinGDK when they don't need to do it on Steam or Epic Game Store or any other launcher, any other store. It's just, it's not great. But that's that. Anything else to add, or should we sort of move on from our...
Let's get
out of this mire.
Purgatory.
Yeah.
Hopefully it is a purgatory and that it would be temporary and then we go to heaven. But, we've had problems with Windows Store for literally years. Okay, let's move on. Okay, final news topic of the week. Last night, as of this filming, Limited Run Games had their LRG3 event on, and yeah, basically, wow, 29 games announced. John, you've got a lot to talk about here, but you're not going to go through all 29 games.
No, not at all. Okay. Just very brief, because, I do like to get physical copies of games, of course, and I know Limited Run has had its ups and downs lately, but I'm still happy that a lot of this stuff is happening. So they kicked off with Star Wars Dark Forces, the Night Dive remaster, which I reviewed earlier this year. I'm a big fan of that, I would say. It's cool to have a new physical copy of Dark Forces, I would say, to go along with my PC big box from back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
One that I was surprised to see is there's a collection featuring the 2 Fighting Force games, which are, I don't know if you guys remember, but the original Fighting Force, I think they were vying for it to be a Streets of Rage game at one point, but it's a Western developed thing. They are pretty fun, actually. I believe Core Design made it, but Sega, probably for the better, didn't go with it for Streets of Rage. They were doing Spike Out in the arcade, though, which was basically Streets of Rage 4, if we're honest. So that's getting a release. There's some cool stuff like Rain World, which is a game that I like, and it's nice to get a disc version. One of the more interesting things that I was surprised to see was Wolfenstein 2 on Switch.
Where did that come from? That's out of nowhere.
You remember, the thing about that, though, is like, if you bought that originally on Switch, I guess Bethesda kind of cheaped out and they went with a small Switch cartridge, which meant you had to download most of the game to your Switch in order to play it. So it was basically DLC in a box. It just happened to have an incomplete cart in there. And I respected them for putting out a quote unquote fixed version. So this is the full game on the cartridge now. So they're using one of the more expensive cartridges. So it's cool to have that, I suppose. Let's see here. There was G.I. Joe and Toxic Crusaders are both pixel art style brawlers. I'm curious to how those will, because there's been a wave of those recently. Some have been amazing, but I think it's really tough to get that right. So I'm curious to see how those turn out. Gimmick 2 was announced, but they showed nothing from it, and the original creator was unaware of its existence until last night.
Well, there you go.
So I'm a little concerned about that because right, I love Gimmick is a game I love very much, and I've always wanted I think it's called Exact Mix, the arcade game that exists, where it was sort of re-released for the EXA or whatever it is, the EXA Arcadia system. There's actually like it looks like a 16-bit version of Gimmick. It's really, really cool, and I've always wanted to play it, and that's not coming home, but we are getting this sequel, so we'll see how that goes. Penny's Big Breakaway, one of my favorite games of this year, also finally getting a release, which I think that's great news, especially given what's happening with Private Division, their publisher, which basically imploded following the release of this game. So there was like the chance of this actually getting a physical release kind of became low when that happened, I would say. But thankfully it's happening. Also C Smash VRS, which now I believe has both, I think they added like a 2D, like a flat mode to it in addition to the PSVR 2 stuff, so you can kind of play it both ways. Because the original is an arcade game, also ported to Dreamcast, which obviously was not VR, so it makes sense to have that in here as well. Beyond Good and Evil got announced, getting a physical release from them. This is that one that Ubisoft mistakenly leaked themselves a while ago, and then they quickly recalled it. And thankfully, the trailer makes it look a lot better than that. Right. So clearly that was just an in-development build. A lot of stuff was not implemented yet. So that's looking good. I think, Alex, you also noticed, and I think this is interesting, that like both Lollipop Chainsaw, which we knew was coming, but then Hitman Blood Money as well, like two sort of 360 era games, both getting sort of like new releases.
Really odd, especially the Hitman one.
Right. I mean, Hitman Blood Money's it's real good. So I'm kind of happy to see it return. Lollipop Chainsaw, though, looks like, I think you commented, it looked like it moved to Unreal Engine 4, which is also interesting.
Yeah, there was SSR in the trailer, which in that form of the way it looks wasn't anywhere near Unreal Engine 3. So it wouldn't be the first time we saw a game ported to UE4 from UE3. Sometimes in really weird cases like the Batman stuff. Right. Where we're just like flabbergasted as to why they did it. But in this case, it'll probably help some of the more oddball aspects of UE3 go away, hopefully. Yeah.
That's right. And then there was a bunch of nice looking carbon stuff, which is the stuff that Audi works on, which is emulated classics. So there's the Gex trilogy. There's Ninja 5.0, which is an amazing GBA game. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but unfortunately it's one that's become prohibitively expensive and rare. Like I think a complete copy will set you back well over $1,000.
Ridiculous.
So it's nice that it's getting a re-release. There's Clock Tower Rewind Tomba Special Edition, which is really, really cool. And that even has things like proper downsampling support. So, which is one of my favorite features from DuckStation. And they seem to have implemented that here in this carbon version, which means, just better visuals for sure. That's where you render high res internally and then you scale it back down so it matches the pixel aspect ratio and the pixel grid of the sprites and the UI stuff. It looks awesome that way. They also announced that Tomba 2 is going to be made as well, available. And I'm curious if they'll be able to improve the performance, because on PlayStation it's a 30 FPS game, whereas Tomba 1 was 60. And then last and least, yeah, the Bubsy collection, which I know Audi, it even says his name right at the end, like produced by Audi Surly, the card. And I feel like it's the kind of thing that he had been working towards for like the last decade. And I'm very happy for him that this has come to fruition, because it's something. Obviously, we did the first appearance of Audi on this channel was with the Bubsy DF Retro I did.
Yeah, right.
Which was one of my favorite videos to work on, just in terms of sheer absurdity, but I loved it. And I actually think Bubsy 1 is a pretty good game. The rest are interesting games.
No, so they're all poor. The first one's poor. I was there.
The first one is not poor. It's fine.
So
it's just really hard.
It's just trying hard to be another mascot platform, and it's just not particularly good.
It absolutely is.
So, but the question is, like, if you port that platform, or like, which version do you go with? Aren't they like somewhat different between the versions?
No, in that case, they're actually really, really similar. And my preference would be Mega Drive.
All right.
Because that runs in a higher resolution.
Great.
I believe. Because, Super NES games are always limited to 256 by 224 for most games there, where Mega Drive usually was 320 by 224. So just having those extra pixels means you see more of the screen. There's more art visible on the screen, and you don't have to stretch out the sprites. I'm pretty sure it's not a 256 game on the Mega Drive, though. I'd have to double check, but if it is a 321, that's the one that they should use. Maybe they might actually and very possibly feature both versions. We'll see. I have no idea what's in this thing yet. The big question mark is the Jaguar game going to be in there? Even though it's horrible, it should be in there.
Okay. I mean, what next? Chester Cheetah, Cool Spot.
Cool Spot. Everyone wants Cool Spot. All of those
crap 90s icons.
Crap 90s icons, baby.
Quote unquote icons, should we say.
Well, Rich, I'm going to put you in a bind here. If you had to sit down for 24 hours and play Bubsy 1 or Afterburner for the Master System, what would you choose?
That's a tough one, because they're both really, really bad. You see, you're not putting me in a bind here because you know it's Bubsy, but I don't want to say it, because the concept that there's any scenario in which I'd like to play Bubsy the Bobcat is it's just untenable.
There we have it, folks.
But isn't it interesting, though, if you look at that, like that mascot platformer era, if you look at some of the new releases here, they're almost like straddling the line, like the Rugrats game. Like, do a lot of people have like a lot of nostalgia for Rugrats? I don't really know, but like
that one's confusing, right?
Yeah. But I at least appreciated with that one, they have like a mix of 8-bit art style mixed with super high res 2D graphics. Unfortunately, the trailer was 30 FPS, so it kind of looked a little awkward, but I respect the 8-bit art style at least.
Okay. Do we have anything more to say about this?
I mean, there was other stuff on there, of course, but that's kind of a rundown of it. I mean, it was a solid enough stuff. Not too many big surprises, but definitely stuff I'm interested in picking up. And yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on that. And happy to see some of those announcements for sure.
Okay.
Maybe Beyond Good and Evil we'll take a look at soon, in digital form, I guess, because that comes out like next week, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, very close.
So yeah, that's it.
Okay. Let's move on. It's time now for Supporter Q&A. It's the part of the show where every week we ask our supporters for a big bunch of questions, and they never disappoint. We choose the best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer, or can fit in the available time space we have left on the show. This first one is from Perfect Organism. Perfect_organism, I should say. I know we've all been wondering it for a while, but do you have any insight to what skincare routine looks like for the Nintendo Switch? Asking because I would love to age as gracefully as that console and want to know the secrets, but the bags under my eyes make me look like I'm more in my Wii U era. I think the point is that we had the Nintendo Direct last week, and Switch was just looking generally fantastic and fabulous. And yeah, they've staved off another year where they should have actually got a new console out. John, what do you think about this? I mean, from my perspective, the first party stuff never really disappoints, but it does seem to be the case there have been some games that have arrived where you just think this should be running on a more advanced system.
I mean, my first thought was, is he talking about the physical design of the machines? Because the Wii U does suck. That super shiny plastic that scratches real easily, combined with the analog sticks that turn into like mush over the years.
Yeah.
Like if you've touched a Wii U gamepad in recent years, you'll find that the analog stick now feels sticky, like it's like tape. It's very unpleasant. That happens to a lot of old controllers, but it's real bad on the Wii U. It also likes to yellow. So not great there. The Switch, on the other hand, aside from the Joy-Con drift, the physical body's held up pretty well. But he's obviously talking about the longevity of the system. And I think I mentioned this on the Nintendo Direct special we did. It's like Nintendo's figured out how to do this sort of like have these long development plans with like a very smooth release cadence. They've managed to scale first party projects across the whole range from very small releases up through huge, big, expensive ones. And they have enough studios working with them and for them that are clearly keeping their budgets in check. They seem to just run such a tight ship, and they've sort of figured out the formula that they're able to just keep producing a huge number of games over and over and over again and just keep going. And I think that's amazing. Like, I think the problem when you look at like the Sony and even Xbox strategy is like a lot of the games they focused on, like you look at the Sony cinema games, doubling down on that. Those are popular. They do sell. But when that's all you have in the chamber, every one of those takes a huge amount of time and money to make. And if you're not like nailing that schedule, there's just like you end up with these huge gaps where nothing's coming out. Nintendo is obviously more about, okay, we have our big games, like the Zelda games, for instance, these big open world Zelda games. So we've got like dozens of other smaller, but still very well designed games from other either partner companies they work with or first party internal development studios themselves. And the sizes are kind of like set up in such a way that like, not only can they keep the budgets reasonable and get these out at a good pace, but even if they aren't like huge sales successes, they don't need to like close down the studios, fire everyone. Like the future of these companies is not dependent on one success or not success. And I feel like they've really nailed that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And beyond that part, there's also, I would say it's not great from a consumer perspective necessarily, but you look at the way Nintendo handles pricings, they never devalue their games. You look at stuff like the subscription services, the quick speed at which games go on sale on other platforms. Like what incentive do you have to drop $70 or $80 on a new game when you know it's going to be cheaper very, very, very soon, right? On Nintendo, You know, for better or for worse, it doesn't really happen. Those games they continue to sell them at a high value right up into the end. And there's only occasional sales, and the sales aren't that deep. And while that does sound bad for the consumer, you have less buying power with these Nintendo games, it does somehow give you this impression that their games are somehow like more valuable long term, that they're not just in it to drop the price shoot out on it and drop it for like $5 in a random flash sale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so for me personally, you know, if it's a Nintendo game coming out and I do want to own it, I mean, I just may as well get it on day one, because like it ain't going to get any cheaper anytime in the next year or two. So that's one. If it's between that and like a PS5 or Xbox game, I'm usually going to go for the Switch game over it, just because there's no danger of suddenly having it cut out from under you in terms of what you spent on it. Which I know that sounds weird from a consumer perspective. I get it, but I think there is some logic there. And I really think this rise of ultra deep sales, the mobile game stuff, the free to play stuff, you know, subscription services, all of the stuff is slowly chipping away at the perceived value of games. And it seems to have worked. The Switch is their most successful console to date, right? They've done something right. They've definitely found an audience. They know how to target a large audience. So, I mean, it's hard to fault them for what they've done here. And even with this outdated Switch hardware, they're still making stuff that is cool to play. And I mean, you look at a lot of the first party Switch games and you say, yeah, this is an ancient tablet, right? But if you had to play Metroid Prime 4 on there, you're not going to be like, oh, this is too ugly. I can't play this. I can only play on my PC. It's still an attractive looking game, even if it's not cutting edge. And you know it's going to run smoothly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's just,
and that's usually the case.
They just make great games. What can you say? And they curate the library very, very effectively. And it is, you know, I guess there are some examples where things didn't quite pan out. You know, Bayonetta.
Oh, for sure.
Bayonetta 3, for example, really should be running on a more powerful system. But, you know, when you look at like Metroid Prime 2 and people are saying, was this running on Switch 2? It's just a ringing endorsement of everything that they've actually achieved on what is essentially a 2015 level mobile piece of hardware, which is just nuts when you think about it. And it's the same hardware that's in the, you know, Nvidia Shield Android TV, which was never a particularly great games machine and hasn't done any.
Not at all.
And that's running at higher clocks, remarkably.
I mean, you could look at something like Zelda, right? The recent Zelda game, and be like, yeah, you know, the performance does not always hold up. But at the same time, again, it's a 2015 mobile system, and they're doing like physics and like all this types of like interactions with different elements in the game world that I know Alex and I both love, and few other developers even bother to attempt with. Yeah. Right? And they're doing it on this super low end hardware, and I think that's cool as heck, even if it does come with somewhat of a performance penalty from time to time.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts?
So.
Yeah, I was just going to say like that they have been very good at least the first party produced stuff, usually at least keeping within the bounds of like reasonable performance for most of the experience. And, you know, I think the Metroid Prime remastering was really good at that, making sure they're not throwing out techniques that break visually very easily and break performance easily usually. So that's like one thing that Nintendo's done way better than most other studios on their own hardware platform, so that when they show off things in the Direct that run relatively smoothly and look artistically sound, then it looks impressive all these years later, which is something that I think is forgotten in the large Western AAA space to a great degree. I would love to see games with less fidelity from Western AAA studios with shorter, you know, times. I've already said, like, we don't need these super expensive cutscenes. Like, please, I don't need them. So,
well, you need them in some games. You wouldn't expect
games.
Naughty Dog to ship something without it, right?
Well,
but not everybody needs to be Naughty Dog. Not everybody
yeah.
needs to be that. That's the point.
Well, I don't even know if I need them in a Naughty Dog game, to be serious.
I think they do, though. That's what they've set up their audience to need and want, right? So
yeah, I know, but like, whatever.
Part
Either
of the
way,
problem, though.
Yeah, I guess expectations are a part of it too. So I think the expectations of the average Nintendo gamer is probably different enough to where those things are just really not important, and they'd rather have a game that's fun. and, attractive. I think that's the most important part.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Leftist Hominid. In the past, on a previous DF Direct Q&A section, you all recommended the Steam Deck over the ROG Ally. Given the existence of the ROG Ally X in the here and now, would you stand by that recommendation, i.e. Steam Deck OLED over ROG Ally X? Simple one for me to answer, because yes, the fundamental issue isn't really the variation in specification between the Ally and the Ally X, right? It's the fact that they're both running on Windows. And that's the primary differentiating factor between the Steam Deck and the Ally, which is that Valve has got everything sorted in terms of what makes a handheld, into a properly viable portable system for PC gaming. It's still got the sort of customization elements of a PC, but it's all contained within a front end that just works. The games just work. There is obviously, though, an area where the Steam Deck is deficient, and that is that, there's a very limited performance level on it, which is finding its limits on a range of AAA games, Avatar, Alan Wake, that sort of thing. And that is where you would want to possibly have a Windows handheld, and the ROG Ally is one of the best there. The X basically addresses a lot of the issues that the original had. Specifically, there's a lot of games that don't really like, a few games that don't like the split memory situation that the AMD APUs have. And Avatar in particular it just doesn't work at all in a decent manner on the Asus ROG Ally, but it does on the Ally X because it's got more memory. You can just throw 8 gigabytes at the VRAM side of things, and then you've got 16 left over for system memory, which is a lot like desktop PCs, a lot of desktop PCs out there.
Really?
So the Ally X is obviously better, but the Steam Deck is still brilliant for what it is, and the OLED model is more brilliant still because of that phenomenal display and the battery life, which is just best in class. So yeah, the Ally X doesn't really change anything in terms of the overall landscape. It's just a better version of the Ally. Maybe things will change when we get to the Strix Point APUs, but they're still going to be running on Windows, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to add? Don't think there's much more to say about that. It's all fairly straightforward. So let's move on. Man, we got a big bunch of Switch and Switch 2 questions this week. This one from Paul Calamata. Since the Switch successor is not expected to launch until Q1 25 at the earliest, it's looking like Nintendo will have stuck to the same hardware for a full 8 years, possibly longer. Do you expect other console makers to also stretch out their current generations longer than they have in the past? Could the PS5 be out for 8 or 9 years before the PS6 releases? What factors may lengthen or shorten the duration of this current cycle? So, John, this is an interesting one, really. It wasn't actually a Switch question as such, but regardless, we've got this interesting situation now where these consoles are actually really expensive to make and are not cost-reducing in a timely manner. And that would kind of suggest that, yeah, maybe we should be extending the current generation. There has been sort of talk of 2028 for the next console generation, which would be, a healthy 8 years. Then at the same time, there's the fact that, Sony is saying that it's kind of reached the peak of its current life cycle, and it's now kind of on the way down. What do you think this is going to mean for the life cycle of, say, the PS5?
Oh man, it feels like that's the trajectory they're heading towards, and I think the impending announcement, we assume, of the PS5 Professional kind of plays into that, right?
Right.
Where I'm sure the problem they face, though, and it ties back into what we were just talking about with Nintendo, is just like development times on stuff. Like the reason we haven't seen, like, say, a proper new Naughty Dog game on PS5 comes down to the fact that they released The Last of Us Part 2 the same year as PS5. Right. And there you go. So it's going to take years to get there. So, like, Nintendo's been able to keep the Switch going because they're very flexible with their first party stuff and able to get a lot of smaller and mid-range projects out as well, while still holding back on some of the big stuff for the new hardware potentially. And I don't feel like Sony or Microsoft really, well, Microsoft might now if they have all those studios with them, but Sony especially seems to be struggling with that. So, targeting, like making new hardware again, it's tough. And I do get this sentiment that we've not really gotten that much out of this gen comparatively. Like it feels like a PC upgrade more than like a fresh new thing somehow. And it's continued to kind of feel that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, because of these long development cycles, it almost doesn't make sense to just release hardware too soon unless you're expecting to do something drastic. Like I could see Microsoft coming up with maybe that handheld Xbox or something else, because obviously they're struggling with Series X. So they're in a position where I could see them come out swinging and try to do something sooner. Yeah. That's different. Sony, obviously, they have this PS4 Pro thing. And I think PS5 Pro thing, I'm pretty sure that'll just kind of continue as is. And like we saw last gen, I mean, PS4 generation was 2013 to 2020, right? What's one more year on that?
I agree. I think it's going to be 8 for Sony. And I think it's going to be less for Microsoft because they're going to want to wash their hands of Xbox Series at some point soon enough to maintain a market position. And I think if you excite people before Sony does, kind of like with the Xbox 360, like I think they could win over more people then, and they're going to want to rely on that. And especially if they're saying like they're going to be pushing hardware hard for the next gen in some way. I also think from the Sony perspective, PS4 Pro is going to make them want to wait longer anyway because they want to differentiate
PS5 Pro.
Sorry, we keep saying that because it's like sorry. PS5 Pro, they want to differentiate their next machine from it and not suffer from like kind of a little bit what we saw with Xbox One X, Series X. I mean, it was a lot better, obviously, Series X, but they want to have it be radically different to the point CPU, GPU wise, and some other special sauce feature that they're going to sell really hard. That, they want to have it be different enough. And I think that's going to require more hardware iteration and time because the AMD portfolio can only produce so much in a short span of time that fits within the power thermal budget and price of what they're going to want. And also be different enough. So I think Sony's going to wait longer and it's going to be 8 years. And then Microsoft is going to be coming out swinging earlier, like John said.
Interesting. I'm going to be watching the PlayStation 5 Pro very, very closely because I kind of think we might be reaching the end of the concept of the console generation. And I can see that there'd be a lot of commonalities between a 5 Pro and a potential 6.
Right.
Because, it's got the machine learning silicon that it needs. It's going to have beefed up ray tracing. It kind of sets the standard almost for what you would expect from a next generation machine. And if you look at the points that I've just described there, that was what was in Microsoft's leaked FTC document for next gen. So, maybe the whole concept of what a generation is going to change.
So, Rich, when do you think we're going to get to the point where, do you think it starts with PS9 when we get to that little crystalline glass ball design? Just with the PS9 logo emblazoned on it? Or is that going to happen before, you think?
I've got no insights on the crystalline ball roadmap going forward.
We need 3D stacking of hardware so it fits in that ball. It's got to. That's what we need.
I mean, I feel like that's where we're heading if that commercial is to be believed. So I can't wait to see when we get there.
We got 30 years.
Who's going to make the ball that you break open and the stuff comes out like that? You think it's going to be AMD still, or you think NVIDIA is going to have this like magic liquid stuff that flies out and goes in your nose,
like the gray goo? Oh God!
Yeah, the BioLink, I think they called it.
Okay.
This is all sounding.
Oliver, put the commercial in here.
This is all sounding deeply sinister.
The BioLink.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so this question comes from Edna Mode. What are your thoughts on the leaks suggesting that the next Switch will have a 1080p screen during portable play? As I have to admit, I'm just as concerned with this detail as the 8nm node prediction. While this might have been necessary given the larger screen size, I still think 720p would have been a better decision. Even with DLSS, 1080p poses a great challenge in terms of DLSS tensor core costs and the strain on the relatively meager memory bandwidth. Interesting sort of question this, because on the one hand, 720p, the Switch has proven it's absolutely fine to have a 720p screen on a handheld, and Steam Deck as well. But at the same time, there are also rumors that it's going to be a larger LCD panel, and maybe 1080p would have some bearing there. I don't know. There's nothing stopping developers just targeting lower resolutions anyway, right, John?
Yeah, but then we get into the whole scaling thing, right?
Yeah, but on a tiny handheld screen.
It still looks worse. This also would compound with backwards compatibility, assuming it's supported, because if they could make backwards compatibility output to the screen in portable mode in 1080p, which the current Switch does docked, it'd be fine. But if it only does 720p in portable mode on old Switch games, and then it's upscaled unevenly to 1080p, that means you're introducing blur into the image. Otherwise, you get scaling issues, right? So it's going to naturally make the image quality like actually worse than it was on an original Switch.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's just opening a bit of a can of worms there. Unless, like I said, they essentially tap into the docked mode for portable play, in which case then you could be outputting native 1080p, not for the games, but like the system itself would be putting 1080p out to the screen, and better scaling would result from that instead of everything being scaled up that way. So I mean,
you're not happy about a 1080p screen?
I'm worried about it. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the smartest play, to be honest, but we'll see. I mean, if they can really support it, it would technically look better, but I feel like 720p, even at like a size like that for games, it looks good. Like I would never look at the Steam Deck OLED and complain about image quality on that screen.
In terms of
those resolutions look awesome, even at low res, and it really gives a lot of additional performance headroom to the developers for portable mode, which could lead to better performance. So
I'm similar of mind as like I can understand the amount of time passing and the availability of 1080p screens making this easier, but I also think I like the way the Steam Deck looks, and that's 720p with a different aspect ratio more or less, and I don't feel like you're losing a lot with res at that experience. I'm just more concerned about things like battery life and performance than I am about resolution. So I actually hope they don't do 1080p.
Yeah.
And I share the concerns of this question here from Edna Mode, that I feel it's like a little bit superfluous, but maybe they'll do it. Maybe they'll surprise us with that, and then they'll make it up with DLSS, and the games are actually running maybe at 540p internally.
I was thinking.
And then they can make it up, and the cost, because don't forget, like running a tensor core, expensive in terms of maybe frame time, but it should be lower power envelope cost, like power that, because it's fixed function versus doing a normal like compute or something like that. So,
and I mean, technically 540p, would you agree, Alex? 540p with DLSS up to 1080p on a screen like that would probably look better than just native 720p.
It would probably look better than native 720p. I actually think performance mode DLSS 1080p is good looking on small screens. Like it is. Yeah. Obviously, if you blow that up to like my C1 here, I don't like it. But that's a very different situation.
Yeah.
I think we could agree, though, that we would all prefer a lower res OLED screen over a higher res LCD, though.
Yes, I would prefer
I actually think the beat they're missing here, and I don't know, maybe they'll still do it, but like I think having HDR support in portable mode on the Switch would have made a big striking difference for any potential buyers. Because when you see LCD, or even if it was an LCD, but like seeing HDR in a handheld thing is just awesome, and phones are doing it. Steam Deck OLED does it. I think it's just awesome to have little small HDR capable displays in your hand, and it's something that would be great for Nintendo to get into. And they should also support it in docked mode. Like, come on, we need HDR.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree entirely with that. yeah, DLSS 540p to 1080, I think will look absolutely fine. Just to say, I think we did do some tests on that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I did on my RTX 2050 sort of projected Switch 2 tests there. So, yeah, give that a shout. I didn't have any problems at all with it, to be honest. So, yeah, I think it would be pretty good. Final question, this one from Daiku. Greetings, DF! Exclamation point. Assuming a Switch 2 release at the first half of 2025, and given the amount of games that Nintendo announced on this Direct, even going as far as to 2025 with Metroid Prime 4, which might be a launch title, do you think there are still unannounced first-party games that will make it to the Switch 2 launch window? Which ones would you expect to see? John?
Given the timings, I think Mario is what we might see. Yeah. I think Mario has a good potential. That feels like something they want. I mean, last time they went with Zelda Breath of the Wild, but they could do Tears of the Kingdom again on there, but it wouldn't have the same impact. I think having a new Mario at launch would be a big deal. And we haven't seen a new real 3D Mario in a while. And last time Odyssey was a release year game, was 2017. It just came out later in the year. But if they could actually get something like that ready for launch, I think that would be gigantic for them. It would move a ton of units than anything else.
Yeah.
No way they have a big Zelda ready. I mean, they'll have the new Zelda game, which looks amazing, but it's not like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom caliber. And obviously they don't have that next one even close to ready. That'll be years. So yeah, I'm going with Mario.
Okay. Alex, I think they've got to actually have games to showcase for the reveal of the system that aren't cross-gen in nature, that aren't, because I'm sure there are going to be games like Metroid Prime 4 that will launch on both, similar to the way that Breath of the Wild did back in the day. But you've got to have a slate of exciting new games that you can't really play on the original Switch as well.
I think that's going to be it. John, I think, is really right on the money with Mario, since we haven't seen it in a while, and I think they could probably do something there that just wouldn't run on Switch 1. Specifically in regards to like storage and storage speed, I think they could get away with things there for a Mario game that would be very compelling. And they could probably design an entire, I always say gimmick, but they could probably design an entire gimmick around the storage speeds for Mario game. You can just envision that. I also think they're going to spice things up. I think we're going to see third-party ports that we just are like, whoa, that's running on Switch 2. And I think that's gonna excite people, because you're gonna start
Jedi
seeing
Survivor, baby.
Jedi Survivor Switch 2. You heard it here first on DF Direct. No, I think we'll see something really cool. I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to think of a lot of games they could announce for that. But I think that's another realm of exciting things that they could put out on the system that would make people want to get it day one. Just really AAA games running on the handheld.
I mean, if you go back to Switch 1, they had obviously Breath of the Wild and games like ARMS. But I think for this time around, I mean, for the launch of Switch 1, they had the luxury of basically, Wii U wasn't particularly successful, right? So they could almost go into Switch with a clean slate. But going into Switch 2, they've also got Switch 1 around, which is still hugely popular. They really need to, show games that are a generation beyond that. So I do think there is going to be like cross-gen upgrades. I wouldn't be surprised if, going back to stuff like Mario Wonder and whatnot, they'll get upgrades to run on a new system. And I guess Metroid Prime, you would expect it to be a cross-gen launch, but they've actually got to push harder. They've got to have a lineup of really fresh, exciting games that just make you want to upgrade. And I think that's the challenge for them. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why it was pushed back into 2025, because every sort of indication we've had from Nintendo has been that they're kind of rather concerned about how they're going to handle this generational transition, and they've got to get it right. So, yeah, I mean, I can't really name specific titles because, we don't know what they are and we can only really guess. But yeah, I think a Mario game would obviously be
if I can throw up a guess here, I'm going to say that maybe, just maybe, knowing how good their partnership is, we'll see a new Shinen game as well.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
From the guys that did The Tourist, Fast RMX, all that. They did The Tourist, The Punch Win. That was a while ago. That was a small project. They got to have something cooking.
Yeah.
And it would be awesome to see that at the Switch 2 launch, because it will push the hardware really far.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what they
do. And Alex is right. Expect the floodgates to open with a bunch of PS4/PS5 games, which you wouldn't have been able to play on Switch 1. There's a whole host of amazing games that could be delivered there. Spruce them up a bit, add some new content perhaps, but they'll still do really, really well.
Hear me out. GTA 5.
Right.
Oh my god. Honestly, but actually, we haven't seen Red Dead Redemption 2 update to the current gen, so maybe that would be a thing.
Oh wait, they did Red Dead 1 on Switch, so maybe they're teeing this up for this little Red Dead 2 at launch.
And then with a current gen re-release, Rockstar loves their BS. So
they love their BS. Okay,
they do love BS. It. Right. Broadcast satellites.
Okay, so that's the final question there for the end of the show. So if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring bells, whatever. Store.digitalfoundry.net for our merchandising wares. And DF supporter program. Each and every week you get early access to the show, bonus materials, whole bunch of stuff happening there. Amazing community as well. So please do consider joining us. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting DF. And we'll see you next week.